Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Community Spotlight. It is our first Community Spotlight on this fine Tuesday afternoon. I hope you guys are having a beautiful day. Despite all of the craziness, we always want to make sure that we're having a fantastic time together. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce David Jones with Innishinty Jones as our first Community Spotlight guests. He is one of our most favored, most loved, most engaged community members here at Geekdom, and what he does for us is, beyond compare. And for those of you that don't know, he's also our 2019 King of the Geeks as part of our Long Live the Geek program. So we are in the company of royalty, I guess you could say. And with that, I would love to kick this over to David Jones to give a little bit more of a background about him, who you are, what you're doing here, how you came to be at Geekdom.
I would think we would just want to end it right there. I mean, that was like perfect. I don't think I'm going to be able to top that. So, so I became a member of Geekdom in 2016, and that was part of a process in which Deborah Innocenti, now Deborah Plissette, the lawyer who started the firm with me, and I, the two of us had been percolating on the possibility of starting something new for almost a year and a half. And we both worked in a comfortable big firm, and had fancy offices and nice healthy paychecks, and but we're both sort of at places in life where we were thinking that it might be interesting to sort of explore a new possibility. And as things sometimes do, we took 18 months basically to think through, like, can we do it? Should we do it? How stupid is this? Are we brilliant? Are we fools? All of those kinds of things. And eventually we decided in the fall of 2016 that we were going to jump and we were going to take the plunge. We started our firm. It was headquartered from the beginning in this very office at Geekdom I'm sitting in right now. And so it's 3.5 going on 4 years. And you asked sort of what are some of the things that led to the process of Deborah and I starting the firm. Ironically, it started with a think tank that our prior firm was putting on called The Future of Law. And the idea was there'd be 6 people from each of the firm's offices, and 5 or 6 outside sort of trusted clients would come. We'd spend an afternoon, we'd have lunch, we'd talk with a moderated conversation about what's good and bad about law firms with the clients who deal with a lot of law firms. And then at the end, we would all have a glass of wine, and hopefully those clients would send us new business. But as Deborah and I were listening to them talk about the kinds of things that drove clients crazy about law firms, there were things like, I get billed for, if I call you for 20 minutes and we talk about, football or, coronavirus or, the movie we saw for 17 of those minutes, I still get a bill for 20 minutes. Drives me nuts. Every time, I've got hours and hours of people who are doing tasks that I know that there is outside software that could do it much cheaper and probably better. And so we were really hearing all those things, and we didn't intend for that seminar to be, what Steve Blank would call your customer discovery, but it really was. And, so we were cataloging, fiercely all the things that the law firms were saying that they wanted, things like fixed fee pricing, reliable budgeting, active software portals, things like that. And we started to build all that into the firm we built, and, have found it to be probably one of the most rewarding experiences of my life.
Thank you for that. Really great to hear how all of this madness sort of came about. I kind of remember when Deborah was working with you, and this is before you and I had met, but she had been putting some of these things in place and how exciting it all was. And then you came on board, and I know that your presence in our community has been transformational for so many people, and myself included, as a staff member, as well as a business owner myself, and as a dear friend. We're incredibly grateful to have you guys make this impact for us, and we love what you bring to the table. And so now that you have created your own firm, kind of leveraging this future of law concepts, or the future of law concepts that were presented to you guys, how does NHNT Jones really kind of stand out amongst some of the firms that are currently around San Antonio, particularly from like an entrepreneurial lens or this startup community perspective?
Sure. Well, I think from sort of an objective sense, I think I've learned a ton about the struggle of starting your own business that informs, because they are real, that has informed my perspective in being a better advisor to the people who walk in the door, many of whom have never started businesses before, and, don't appreciate how hard it is to start a new business. And what my takeaway for what makes the firm different, I think, is it goes back to some of the advice that I got when I first became a member here, which was a few months before the firm started. And that was, if you're going to get a membership in a co-working space, engage. Like, find out who all these people are and what they do, and how, you guys can all be force multipliers for each other. And I mean, that was by far the best piece of advice I ever got. And I sort of made it a point to engage people, who are, my office is on the 8th floor, so, right by the kitchen. So in normal times, it's sort of a beehive of activity out there. And I made a commitment to myself that I was going to try to just meet everybody. And, part of that is I'm, mildly extroverted, but partly it's just like, oh, really, you do that? Oh, really, you do this? And then, a couple of other takeaways from that are that, well, first of all, it's just cool to hear about all the stuff that people are doing. And secondly, there's something about being in an environment where almost everybody who's there is there not to punch a clock, but to try to push the thing that they are doing forward. And, being around those people kind of creates this sort of self-reinforcing cycle of wanting to do that yourself, to not let yourself get stale, or to let yourself get comfortable that you've hit a certain plateau in what you're doing. And the people around you, they're all struggling with the same things, right? It's like everybody now, in the early part of the coronavirus, everybody was worried, is every one of my customers gone? Am I ever going to get, am I ever going to have a new person call me or send me an email with business again? And, it's come back to some degree. I've been really lucky. My work has stayed very busy through this whole time. And so that's one thing that I've gotten out of it, is just sort of feeling part of a community of people that have sort of a similar, even if we're doing very different things, we have sort of a similar outlook on what we're doing. And the other thing that I think I've encouraged people to do, as you're in a space like this, is try to be a connector, right? Like, because there's tons of people come in here who, know what they know, but they don't know what they don't know. But if you know somebody who does know something that they need to know, just put them together. You never know what kind of synchronicity is going to happen. And I have felt the rewards come back to me both, at a personal level, at a professional level, in terms of friendships and connections that I've made and built and strengthened, by trying really hard to be somebody who's very conscious of being a great connector. Because that's how communities like this gain strength, is by the sort of the collective force of all of the members.
No, thank you so much for that insight. And I love hearing it from your perspective. And you're absolutely right. You're very intentional about how you interact with the members in this community, the people in your firm, and in other places as well, because it's not just Geekdom that you do this kind of work. You do this all over the San Antonio ecosystem. And so you really bring that level of passion and intention to the table. And in a place like Geekdom, or in a place like the downtown tech district in San Antonio, or the entrepreneurial efforts that are happening in this city, as well as just business in general, the business communities at large, like, we definitely feel the impact of what you bring. And we're very thankful to have such a driving force for that kind of relationship building and intention. So thank you. And as a result, for those of you tuning in, we have gotten a stream of shout outs and hellos from some of his adoring fans. What's up, Luana Chambers Lawson? How's it going, Iris Gonzalez? Tudwin. We've got, I would imagine is Omar Kimbaya writing in. We've got a shout out from Daria as well. So this is just the beginning of, I think, what's going to be a very engaging conversation. So if you do have questions, we are going to be taking them throughout the time. We're on Facebook and YouTube channels right now. So go ahead and drop them in the comments. We'll make sure that David gets a chance to answer anything that you would like to throw his way. So before we get into some of the meatier topics and some of the grittier ones, particularly around COVID-19 things, I think one of the biggest questions that a lot of people have when they're starting their business is, okay, I know people will pay me for these things. I know that I can provide valuable services, but how do you go about building your initial client base, especially as a startup and as a startup law firm? How do you get that whole ball rolling?
Well, I think for me, it was a process of really, going back to the phrase customer discovery, like really trying to figure out, okay, I know the things I want to do. Do people want them, and will they pay for them? And I think if you go into the process of starting a business, recognizing that there's a lot of ground that has to be worked. There's a lot, fields have to be tilled and all of that sort of thing before you have a reliable customer base. I think it's just sort of being committed to delivering really good quality service, delivering great customer service, being transparent in your pricing so that people know what they're getting and they're not surprised by the bills they receive or the invoices that they get. And I think, I'll go back to an anecdote that I remember from the end of 2017, I guess it is. I was over at Richter Goods on Broadway, the collection of really cool little stores that are all in Airstreams or trailers or modular structures. And I had gotten to know Mario Guajardo, who runs Richter Goods, a little bit through the course of the year. And he asked me, how things were going. And I said to him, well, I've just kind of passed this point where, it's been a year. And I had a couple of observations about it. One of them was that even though every single day during the course of that first year, I felt like I got nothing done because my to-do list was longer when I went home than it was when I got in the morning. Looking back with the benefit of time, you realize, man, I got lots of done, and how rewarding that was. And we talked about the people I was working with, who I love, and I talked about both in terms of clients and coworkers. And I said, but truthfully, Mario, we're still trying to figure out how to make the the kind of income that we really want to make. And he said, well, just be patient on that because it takes time to develop it. And then he said something I will always remember, which is he kind of looked at me and said, but you're like, he noticed I was basically like beaming when I was talking about some of the people that I work with. And he's like, I could see how much satisfaction you get from working with those people. And he says, just remember, wealth comes in many forms. And, it's green American dollars, but it's also satisfaction of knowing you've helped someone, that you've had an impact on them, that you've, done something that helped their business and avoid, falling into a pothole that they could easily have fallen into. And that was a big part of it. I think trying to approach the business not like I was, searching for customers, but that I was trying to find people with whom I could build relationships that involve me being somebody that they trust on a personal level as well as a professional level. But if you're starting a business and I know an accountant who could be helpful to you, and you don't know an accountant, or you don't know a tax person, or you don't know a web developer, or you don't know, somebody else that would be helpful to you, I'm part of what I think my greatest value to a lot of people I work with is that I connect people, again, going back to connections, I trust the people that I connect to do right by each other. And so far, they almost always have. And, it's something that, they appreciate. Frankly, I think it reflects well on me if I connect people who deliver, similar quality of timely service and with a focus on doing right by the customer. So that's been a big part of it.
Man, this is just, I'm so glad that we're getting the chance to do this, because you have so much great insight into kind of what we're all sort of figuring out together, and you have such a unique perspective, and you really live out, your principles and how you're wanting to build business and build good business with great people. And I think that that shows. We've got a couple of things kind of coming down the pipeline. Thank you, John Ryan Garcia, for shouting out. We agree that David Jones is definitely one of the best humans around. Lamont, so he asked if there was any great advice that you might have for connecting with members virtually. Have you found a good way to kind of get around some of that right now?
It's really tricky. It just is. And I guess the best thing that I could suggest on that is something I have tried for the last couple of months to be very focused on when I'm having virtual meetings, and that is, there's a real temptation with sort of the formality and structure of something like a Zoom or a Google Hangout or Microsoft Teams to jump right into the business of the meeting. And one of the things I've heard a lot of people say that they worry is getting lost in as we are all living, working, mostly working from home. I mean, I'm at my office today, but is that be very intentional when you're in those virtual meetings to try to bring some element of like humor, if it's right, or humanizing element to the conversation that you're having, because all of us are just, whether you're the most extrovert or the most introvert, everybody, the thing that people miss the most over the last 3 or 4 months is the kind of human connection that we all get from, little, hey, how's it going at the coffee machine, or, just walking down the street and running into somebody that and, trying to be very intentional in meetings you have about setting that kind of stuff up. I've also tried to be very conscious of the fact that every day I try to make it a point to have at least one, solid personal phone call or Zoom meeting that has nothing to do with business with people. It could be somebody who's a business connection, but even if we don't have work that we're doing right at that point, I've been really trying to sort of keep those networks alive by being somebody who reaches out every once in a while to just say, hey, what's going on? How are you? Let's trade stories. Because, for people who are, in their apartments, and their circle of people that they're communicating with is narrower, those random calls from somebody who's not a family member, not a spouse, not a blood relative, they make all the difference in the world, because we're all seeing different things, right? And doing that, I think, making it a point to do that has been really helpful for me, both in terms of, from a networking standpoint, but also just frankly for, the standpoint of maintaining sanity. Because commiserating with other people over all the crap we're all going through it's good therapy.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, thank you for that. Lamont, I hope that answers your question. I think it definitely highlights and speaks to the fabric that we've all sort of woven together in our relationships. Geekdom is one of those unique places in the San Antonio ecosystem. I know that in my travels and other people's travels, when they come to visit, that there's something magical about this community and how collaborative we are and how connected we are, particularly in times of crisis. And, again, you really embody the person who helps hold some of those things together for us. And I know that you and I have reached out independently of work to check in on each other. There are other members in this community too that have formed these really great groups, and just, pouring into each other as people. Because one of the best things about this situation is that we're all in it together. But one of the crappiest things about this situation is that we're are all in it together. And so if we can find time to sort of poke our heads up a little bit and make eye contact or make a voice contact and just be people together,
Right.
you definitely bring that to the table. And there's lots of ways that people can try to manifest that for themselves and for their businesses, whether that's partners or clients or, customers, whatever it is. Like, you can always add that human touch to whatever is
Yes.
going on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could add one thing, one of the things that I did, sort of coincidentally starting right around the time that everybody went on lockdown, was, I don't know if, for any of you who don't know the book, The Artist's Way, essentially it's a 12-week program. It's sort of unlocking your creativity, and it's directed at people in entertainment fields, excuse me, who are struggling with confidence or struggling with being blocked. And so I got in and I started doing this program with about a dozen other people who are all creatives. They're filmmakers, screenwriters, movie directors, things like that. And we met once a week on Zoom, and we sort of gradually invited additional people to come into the group. And as we finished the book, because there's a chapter each week and there's some writing exercises, it's a really amazing program. Highly, highly recommended. But when we got to the end of the 12 weeks, which is about 2 weeks ago, we realized that we had really become friends, and we wanted to just continue to get together once in a while. And so we kept the Wednesday night at 6 p.m. hour-long Zoom that we have, only now instead of talking about The Artist's Way, we talk about stuff we have going on in our life. Like for a lot of them, it's how long is the entertainment business going to be shut down? And we're all kind of, we all trade stories about what's happening in our little corners of the world, and I think forming groups like that, especially if it includes people that are not people that are friends of yours, but maybe they're friends of friends or they're acquaintances of friends, to create sort of like it's almost like now a virtual happy hour. It's not mandatory that we show up on Wednesday night at 6 with a glass of wine, but a whole bunch of people do. And it's been a great way to sort of take, for different periods of time, we've been trading, book recommendations and music recommendations, and, what are the movies we're watching that are either about, racial injustice or just, I need to watch something silly and dumb that's going to take me away from the world for a little while. And those have been enormously helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. And yeah, the Artist Way I hear is highly recommended by a lot of people for just all kinds of personal discovery, artistic discovery, commitment to perfecting your craft. And for those people who maybe don't feel like they have a creative bone in their body, the Artist Way is really about helping you sort of unlock and appreciate that creativity that you bring to the table. And fun facts about David Jones: if you don't know, this man is all about music. If you're looking for the best new album that's coming out, the deep cuts, like you're really digging into those tracks, he's the guy to go to. Same thing with movies and television shows. He is definitely the resource that we use quite a bit in our community space. And there's always some amazing things to provide. So thank you. And thank you, Bernard, for the shout out. It's good to hear from you. We hope that you're well. We're going to move into some of, the things that we've been kind of tap dancing around. I know we have a question about startup mistakes, and we're definitely going to get to that, but, we want to kind of flesh out some of these things a little bit more. So David, can you please talk to us a little bit about, what Innocenti Jones has been going through as part of the COVID-19 crisis that we're all facing, and how have you pivoted your business or grown, or what new opportunities have come as a result?
Well, it really depends on what time period we're talking about. Because I think in that last half of March, it was just complete chaos for everybody, me included, right? We were all shutting down. Well, not shutting down, but everybody's stopping going to work. We're all going to be at home. We have no idea if the sun is going to actually come up tomorrow, and it was just madness. Beginning in April, I will say that there are some things that I've taken away from coronavirus and the racial injustice that have been incredibly heartening for me, and have been some of the things that have carried me through this with, some level of optimism intact. One of them is, there's a series of stories out there of people who, whose businesses went to zero when, schools closed down and sports shut down and we were all doing stay at home. And, I can give, one example. I can give a lot of examples, but one was the company that, used to have an office here. They used to be called Sports Sonar. Now they're called the Sonar Company. And this was a company that had a technology that they sold principally or almost exclusively to schools and sports leagues and sports venues. And so their entire customer base went to zero in like a 24-hour period. But I have watched them pivot to sell their technologies to channels and in ways and to markets that they hadn't even thought of. And they're thriving and growing and hiring. Another one I can think of was, a client who's kind of become a friend, who had she had been thinking, she's a design architect, and she had been thinking about starting a company selling very high-end sort of luxury bed and bath products containing CBD. Well, she was part of a layoff at her company, and within 2 weeks later, website was live, product was in stock, sales were being made. And it's just, I'm kind of watching so many of these people, demonstrate the resilience. And I know that's a word that's been thrown around a lot, but it's been thrown around a lot for a reason. And then, recently, I'm seeing people, in all kinds of different industries really struggling to figure out, how bad and how long is the slowdown going to continue, especially with the recent spike. And, what I'm seeing from those people and is, and this is a word I use sort of in combination with the collective response we're all having to, George Floyd and the, racial injustice and the protests that followed, which is that resiliency has been, a strong feature of what people are showing in the last few months, but determination to change things, that feels to me, I hope and pray, like it's something that's going to be sticky. And, and I know a lot of people who are, we're trading resources, we're sharing books we want to read, we're sharing ideas about things that we think we can do, and whether that's related to voting in November, whether that's relating to changing laws, whether that's pushing the city to rank higher on the 8 can't wait scale, because the city actually has, I think it's 4 of the 8 now. And those are 8 steps that police departments can take immediately that will reduce the likelihood of violence against individuals in the community in connection with arrests. And, I've seen so many people kind of stepping up and basically challenging the people around them to hold them accountable to actually walk the walk in terms of staying attuned with doing what part we can all do to, keep the topic of racial injustice in the forefront of people's minds.
Thank you so much for speaking about that, because this isn't just a pandemic because of the COVID-19 crisis, but we have a lot of systemic issues that have been exacerbated even more than they already were because of what's currently happening. And we appreciate, you talking about it on our platform. And, there is a lot of action that is being taken, which is fantastic. And I know that we'd love to see more things come to fruition as a result of all the advocacy and the change. But yeah, determination and resiliency have to go hand in hand. These things, they're not going to transform overnight. We're not going to recover overnight, but together, I think we have a really good shot of making that happen. So thank you. We did have a question come in that had to do with virtual platforms. And so as, people are relying even more on these virtual platforms, can you speak to any legal release or verbiage required for virtual meetings? There has been a lot of changes to security protocols and processes. Do you have any resources that you would want to recommend that people check out, or verbiage that they should consider adopting?
Well, that's a great question, Lisa. I hope you're well. You're right, Joyce, that every one of the platforms has done a lot to improve security. Because there was a lot of criticism in the beginning of the coronavirus about, the ease with which people could Zoom bomb meetings. And if you don't know what that means, consider yourself lucky. But as their security protocols have come up, I don't know that there is legal verbiage that I use or that I recommend necessarily that people use when you're hosting a virtual meeting. But I do definitely recommend that if the meeting is being recorded, most platforms will have something that shows that it's being recorded on the screen. But if it's being recorded, tell people you are, and tell people what you're planning on doing with it, so they can have an opportunity to opt out if they don't want their participation in a Zoom meeting where their face would be seen, or a Google Hangout where their face would be seen. If they would prefer not to be part of that forum if it's recorded. Some of the other tips that I use are just things like, all the platforms have features that allow you to create random logins and passwords that are unique for every meeting. And I always do that, just because you never know for sure if a password that's a recurring, or if a login that's a recurring login for, say, weekly meetings, you never know who's going to have access to that, and it's just smarter to have unique ones for each meeting so that you can carefully make sure you don't have somebody sort of surreptitiously listening in on a meeting who you don't want listening in. And this rule doesn't apply in Texas, but it might apply if you were in one of the states that has a requirement that both parties to a conversation have to consent to that conversation being recorded. If you were, for instance, in California, before you recorded, you definitely would want to tell the person who you're on with that you're recording. Now, because we are here in Texas, even if we are with someone who is in California, you don't need to make that warning, because Texas is a state that has a one-party consent to the recording of a video or a telephone. So it's not some specific thing. It's really more a matter of just sort of good practice rules.
No, thank you for that. That is, I'm sure, very helpful. We don't always understand the weird legal situations we might find ourselves, or how we might be opening up ourselves up to vulnerability or compromising our clients or our partners, especially when implementing new technology processes such as this, and confidentiality things. So the clarity on that, we really appreciate, for sure. So to kind of get into some more fun, wonderful things about you, one of your top 5 Gallup strengths, I believe, has to do with individualization. And I think that kind of comes through with how intentional you are with people, but also your ability to really recognize talent, and being able to find the right people to do the right thing. So as part of one of the reasons why David Jones was selected or nominated and then voted in as our King of the Geeks for 2019 really had to do with his commitment to our community, but also his involvement in the Students Plus Startups program. And that is run out of the 80/20 Foundation. It was an initial partnership with Trinity University, and we have now since gone national, and it opened it up to a lot of college students to come in, and they get paired with startup companies. So they come down to San Antonio for the summer. They get paid for full-time internships. It's a really lovely relationship. If you're curious about getting involved, I recommend that you check them out, Students Plus Startups. But David, I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit more about the impact of what that program has had on your business, and how you really leverage the benefits to the fullest extent.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing I should say on Students and Startups is that I have to give a shout out to Alex and Tu from the 80/20 Foundation for making the program happen at all this year. As you can imagine, through March and April, there was incredible uncertainty about whether internship programs of any kind could survive into the summer. And Alex and Tube moved mountains to make the program happen. And so I first have to shout them out. Yeah, and I guess there's a couple of things that I enjoy tremendously about the Students and Startups program. From a purely selfish perspective, one of them is that somebody else does the vetting before we ever get to the interviews, which is wonderful. So you're starting off with a pool of incredibly high quality candidates. But what I think I've gotten the most, that I personally have gotten the most from in the program, is that because it's a subsidized program, so the companies pay part of the interns' compensation. The 80/20 Foundation pays part of it, and the students get free housing. And the reason I mention all those things is because it means that anybody can be part of this program. You don't just have to be somebody whose family resources or other resources are sufficient for you to take an unpaid internship. So it opens the playing field to anybody who wants to apply. And when I've hired, I've been just so incredibly fortunate. I've hired in the last 4 years 6 people, and have 2 interns this summer who are both just rock stars with like rocket ship career trajectories ahead of them. Zari Chipman and Montana Meeker. But all 6 of the people that I've hired have, I've just seen them, by virtue of their exposure, not so much to me, but to the people that I work with. They've seen what it takes to have the drive to want to start a business. And I think in some of them, it has really sparked an interest in becoming a lifelong learner, because they see the diversity of ranges of things that, we have in front of us every day in my practice, which I'm so incredibly fortunate. There are things like, one day, I can't remember if it was Zari or Montana. So these are like, how is it possible we're looking at how you get illicitly taken, underage porn videos down from the internet, because we had a client who asked about that. I should clarify, and trademarks on chemical things and contracts for web developers all on the same day. And I think, what I've gotten out of the program as much as anything else is just kind of seeing the interns that I've worked with, just grow over the course of their time, working. Now, I don't attribute it to me, I attribute it to them taking advantage of an opportunity, but just, really embracing the people that they get to meet and asking, a lot of questions to try to figure out the answer to the question that, every 21-year-old has, which is, what the hell do I want to do with the rest of my life? And I'm not sure they have answers at the end of all of it, but they've probably knocked a few things off the list. And it's been a great reward to be part of that.
No, thank you for sharing more information about your experiences with the Students Plus Artists program. We absolutely love incorporating that into our community. We're so glad that more people get to come in and participate. There are numerous companies within San Antonio that have really taken that to heart. And so I've met phenomenally talented interns come down from all over the place. And it's been a real joy, especially, you go out of your way to develop your interns as people and what their interests are outside of this internship. And you really maximize the time that they have by introducing them to people to expand their network, to try new things. And, it's really inspiring to see that. We have about 20 minutes left. And so we want to kind of use as much time as we possibly can. So we had a question from Washington, which was, what general verbiage for digital platforms do we need to have, and how do we protect ourselves? And I don't know if that's outside of integrating like these virtual communication platforms, or if this is just in general, do businesses need to have some kind of a technology or, technology clause?
Yeah, I mean, Washington, it's good to not see you, but to see your name on a Zoom chat. Hope you're well. Yeah, feel free to clarify if I'm not answering the question you're intending to ask, because I think with so many things going online, and I know a lot of companies that had primarily an in-person or a relational set of a customer base. We're creating online stores as fast as they could once the stay-at-home orders started to come in. And when it comes to things like those stay-at-home or the online shopping, online delivery of goods and services, it's very important to have some of the same things that needed to exist before coronavirus, which is clear privacy policy, affirming what you're going to do with the data that is provided to you by customers, what you won't do with the data that's provided by your customers. Will you market the data, anonymized or otherwise, that you receive through your site? Terms of service, which is what are the customers allowed to do with information they pull from your website? And if you're a SaaS product, is there an end user license agreement that you need to have in place? But those are not things that are novel to the times we're in. They're just something that, as a lot of people have moved into creating a digital business for the first time, they're not aware of. And those are resources. I mean, I could definitely help people with that, or point you to places where you can get some background reading to figure it out yourself. Because if you're building a website, you're almost certain, through any legitimate platform, you're almost certainly going to be asked, about creating a privacy policy, about creating a terms of service. And so a lot of those things are built into the platforms already, or at least menu options are built into the platforms already.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, if you have last minute questions, we have about 17 minutes left in the conversation with David Jones. So please feel free to drop them in the chats, and we'll be sure to try to get as many questions answered as possible. I guess we should probably address the question that came in earlier, which are, in your time here at Geekdom and branching out with this new firm and doing a lot more business with startups, though they're not your only business. You do serve a lot of clients from a variety of sizes, and you have a really phenomenal reputation as a pretty powerful litigation attorney, among other things. But if you would, please just speak to maybe like the top 3 biggest mistakes that you see startup companies make and how founders might be able to avoid them.
Oh, the number one is sharing ownership of a business with somebody you don't know very well, in a way that's difficult to undo. That's easily the biggest mistake. Because I see people who, whether they're forming an LLC or they go online and they form a corporation, and it's 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. If it's one person's idea, but the other 3 are interested in doing, the development work or doing the marketing or doing whatever, it's sort of not against my nature or it's not in my nature to encourage people to be super selfish when it comes to anything. But I definitely encourage people to be super selfish if you are the person with the passion behind the idea and you need other people to help you make it a reality because it involves either skills or technology or something that you don't understand. You need to make those people earn their equity. And you need to be in a position where if they decide at some point down the road, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, that this person just isn't a good fit for you anymore, either because you've outgrown them or because, you or they have got some other new idea that you want to start investing in, time in, or because you just realize you don't have the same level of drive and passion, and you're working 60 hours a week and they're working 20. You need to be able to be in a position where you can adjust ownership or retrieve ownership to protect yourself against being in a situation where your idea, your baby, the thing you want to make your lifelong mission, is burdened by a whole bunch of dead weight ownership. That's the number one thing. And another thing I guess I would add, has to do with protecting branding in the form of, because I do trademarks for a lot of people, but the conversation I typically will have with folks about branding actually goes way beyond that, because and this is sort of a mix of business and legal advice, right? Where, when you're thinking about what you want to call your company, it's very important for you to not only be able to protect your brand through trademarks if you're doing online business, or if you have a brand name that you really love, but it's important to be able to have the other channels that you're going to be using to reach your customer base either be the same name, the same address, or some kind of close variant, so that when people are searching for you on the internet, they can find you relatively easy and come to engage you through whatever the channel is that works best for them, whether that's Instagram, whether that's Facebook, whether that's Twitter, whether that's TikTok, whether that's a website.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We have about another 15 minutes or so left, and we've gotten some really wonderful shout outs. Hello, Lenora. Thank you so much for tuning in too. We absolutely agree, Zari, Montana, and Daria, former Students Plus startups, and maybe even this year too, alum. Fantastic women working with David Jones this summer. Let's see. Okay, great.
Hey, Joyce, while you're doing that, can I give a shout out to Leonora too?
Yeah, absolutely, you can.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Leonora Walker, Leonora runs a nonprofit here in town called Freed Texas, which which helps create programs and services that assist both people who are coming out of prison and the families that they're coming home to with transitioning from prison to living again in society. And provide support networks to help prevent recidivism. Leonora is just a walking bundle of joy. And the shout out that I want to give to her actually is not that. It's that Leonora is one of the speakers tonight in the TPR monthly recurring event called Worth Repeating. And tonight it's about different speakers on the subject of how racism has affected them in the course of their life. And I know Leonora is going to crush it. So consider having that be your hour from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. tonight.
Thank you so much for calling attention to the work that Leonora and her team do with Freed Texas. And she does have a powerful story. She's got an amazing journey that has taken her to this point. She's doing phenomenal work in this space, and we're very proud of her as a member of our community. And thank you also for letting people know about Worth Repeating. That's coming up. It's a really great event series. I highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out before, definitely tune in. And tonight is a good reason to do that and to show our support for Lenora. And that kind of brings me back to a question that LJ asked, which had to do with, the progress that we're seeing, or these efforts that we're seeing in San Antonio and in other places having to do with inequality and racial injustice. How do we take it further, or how do we atone for some of the things that have occurred? And I'd love to get your perspective on it, David, because you're such a huge advocate for equality and improvement in our community.
That's a big question, and I hope my answer meets the moment. I think that for each of us, education about things we knew or thought we knew but didn't really know is tremendously important. I've had numerous people, in the Black community say that that's their primary goal for other people is to become more educated than you were about history and its pervasive, pernicious effect on the Black community. And I also think that for each of us, trying to identify things that we can do that we'll stick with, that will make a difference. Because I don't, this is not, there's no magic bullet cure, and I feel like all that people can do is, there's a song that was written, the rapper Illy wrote a song around the time that President Obama was leaving office. And he talked about, both his admiration for the president and that president, and how, his effect was not necessarily going to be realized in the immediate term, because what he was trying to do, or what he did was, what he did and all of us can do is, turn it 2 degrees, turn it 2 degrees, turn it 2 degrees. And if you keep turning it 2 degrees, eventually you've made a huge difference. And, for me, the way I've decided, or one way I've decided to try to walk the walk is to become active in some of the organizations in town that encourage voting registration in minority communities. But everybody has their own thing, and I think it's just like, you mentioned the subject of individualization and in the Strength Finder results. Part of that to me is looking at yourself and what your strengths are and your passions are, and trying to find a way to lean into those passions in a way that will make a difference in society. Because I have a feeling that with, the virus still rampaging and the tensions of the election coming up, there will be no shortage of information out there that will be inspiring to people to, get involved, whether it's for me, voter registration, whether it's for other people fighting voter suppression, through laws, through local election officials, through court cases, because that's obviously a major concern heading into the fall. But I mean, I really think it's like anything. There are people who do nonprofit work with victims of sexual assault because they're passionate about it, and they can stick with it even though it's hard because it's something that they believe in. And I think finding something that you believe in as the way that you carry forward, a hope to make a difference. That's the best tip I think I can give. I hope that met the moment, LJ.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that it did as well. Thank you for speaking to that. It's kind of hard to articulate at times the best path forward in these things. And, having the ability from my work here at Geekdom and just in general with public-private partnerships and occupying space with civic innovation, and in a city like San Antonio that has very strong inclusion and equity goals built into all of those initiatives, and how passionate our communities are, protesting, advocacy, awareness, education, listening, all of those things are really great places to get started, but we have to carry it further, and the process is much longer. And for people out there who don't know how to get started, getting engaged in your council districts and steering committees that form and the housing committees and having representation, that is how you change things by 2 degrees at the local levels that impact your immediate way of living. And how do you get even further entrenched in building things and solving civic issues and problems? And so if you're curious about where to go, like, there are tons of resources on the city website, on the council district websites. There's a lot of nonprofits in San Antonio that are all about advocacy and equality. And so I encourage you to reach out to people and ask those questions to carry it further. So thank you. We have about 6 minutes left.
Okay, so Joyce, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can I ask you a quick question? This will only take a second. Okay, yeah. So Daria Galbraith, who was one of my students at Startups and Interns last summer, who was so awesome that there was no way she was going to be allowed to quit. So she still works here. And if you see this wall behind me, you see that big collection of Post-its. She gave me a hard time because I had no wall art. So I decided, okay, I've got like a big old stack of multicolored Post-its on my desk, and I just slapped them up on the wall. So my question is, does that count as art?
Yeah, so I actually know a little bit of art. I took some art history in college, and I have a background in theater. I have a good eye, and I would tell you that it's very contemporary. It's very minimalist and abstract. But I think that if you're not looking too closely at the notes, it definitely could qualify as art. If anything else,
Okay.
it's a statement piece. That we highly support you. I mean, not everything is as great as the painting behind me,
That's right.
but it has a very vibe. There's lots of pictures that make up the painting in Audrey's corner on the 8th floor, and I think that with enough post-it notes, you could create a very similar masterpiece, given the time. So thank you for that. Okay, so I want to end this in a way that is very indicative to who you are as a person, because you are more than a legal advisor, a trusted legal advisor. You are more than a bedrock member of this community and a fixture of all things wonderful. You're also very active in some really cool ways, and I know that you make it a point to give to yourself time to step away, because it is incredibly stressful. And I imagine that someone with the kinds of clients or the sensitive issues that you deal with, and the counsel that you keep, that can be kind of burdensome, because you can't just easily share about your work life. And how do you, as a founder and as an employer and a lawyer and doing all kinds of great things in San Antonio, how do you find time to unwind and relax? And what is your favorite thing to do, and what could people go check out to maybe incorporate that into their own lives?
Oh boy, great question. Well, for I guess a couple things. So this might not be everybody's jam, but when I'm done at the end of the day, the first thing I do as I'm closing up my laptop is put my earbuds in and turn music on, and make it a point that even if I'm going back to work, when I get home, I'm going to take that 20 minutes minimum to just decompress with something that either I found on Spotify, or that I found that somebody recommended to me, or that I found on the music app, the radio station music app that I get a lot of music from, which is the public radio station in Los Angeles. It's called KCRW, and they have multiple streams of music. It's really amazing radio station. That's one thing. I would have thought that during this time when things slowed down a little bit, that I would have done a ton of reading. And I've done some, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I don't know if other people are experiencing this too, but I sometimes find it hard to get my brain settled enough to really dig into a book for 100 pages in an evening. And this, I think this isn't so much about stress or the confidentiality of things. It's just, there's just like this electricity in the air that for me sometimes has made it harder to read. But I've also tried to make it a point, both days on the weekends, and sometimes if I get out of here early enough, at least once during the week, to hop on a bike and either use the Greenway trails or some of the areas around where I live to listen to a podcast that has nothing to do with work, hopefully nothing to do with coronavirus, but it's just sort of either a fun one or a diversion that just changes the topic. Those have been the main things.
Thank you. No, I completely understand. It's been pretty difficult just in the last, it's been such a busy time for so many people, especially in the San Antonio ecosystem. People are building things all the time. As a founder, it's constantly grinding away. And so it can be difficult. It's very impactful and wonderful to have access to reading materials and all the things to challenge us and stretch our brains. But it's also a lot of work at times to have that clarity and focus to just really absorb it. So I'm glad that you find some balance. And, you actually gifted me for Christmas 2 books that were really poignant and timely. So The Yellow House, which I don't remember the author at this time, but I highly recommend that if you're curious.
Sarah Broom.
Thank you. Yeah. It's a phenomenal book. It's very beautiful, and it touches on a lot of the issues that we talked about today. And then another one was called Exhalation by Ted Shank, and it was the New York Times both of them are New York Times bestsellers in 2019. And Ted Shank's Exhalation is a collection of short stories having to do with the future and sci-fi. And there's a lot of dystopic sci-fi in the world, and and as someone who does emerging technologies research and business, it's kind of a lot to ask sometimes to get into sci-fi, but I found it to be incredibly poignant, very beautiful and hopeful, and also touches on some very interesting issues that we also talked about. So, again, your ability for individualization and talent picking and good information, it abounds. With that, we're a couple minutes over, but thank you so much.
Can I make one book recommendation?
Absolutely.
Can I make one book recommendation? So Zari and Montana and Daria, if they're watching, they're going to roll their eyes because they've heard me mention this book so many times. But earlier this year, a client got me an advanced copy of a book called A Knock at Midnight by an attorney activist in Dallas named Brittany K. Barnett. And Brittany has made her life's work as a lawyer and as an activist, trying to get people who were sentenced to life without parole during the time period when the worst of the federal crime bills on crack, cocaine compelled judges to make those sentences in situations when the offenders were nonviolent, when they were minor players in a drug game, or even if they were simply the last person standing because everybody else had already made a deal to testify against them. And Brittany's mother was a person who was sentenced to life without parole when she was not very old. And she's made her life's work doing that. And it's not something that you can do by going to court and making motions, because, the sentences are the sentences and they haven't been reduced retroactively. And so her work principally involves making petitions to unsympathetic government officials to either pardon or to grant clemency to people who are in that circumstance. And if you remember hearing the event that a year or so ago where President Trump met with Kim Kardashian because there was a woman who'd been let out of prison. Well, Brittany was the lawyer on that case. And her book called A Knock at Midnight, which I'm going to put in the group chat, is a memoir of her life and a story of her work. And it's an incredible book. It's only available now for pre-order. It was going to be released, but it's coming out in September. But it is, and I don't think I'm saying this because I'm a lawyer, but it's just the most vivid storytelling that she does. And the work that she does is just so incredibly inspiring because it's constantly fighting against really long odds with, unsympathetic audiences, but she still does it and maintains a really joyful presence.
Man,
highly recommend.
That's a mic drop moment, like way to encapsulate so many of the things that we've covered today. And there's been so much props and love that's been coming to you. Lamont, says thank you for all of your wisdom. I know that people were celebrating Lenora in the chat. Lisi, prior was talking about some of the really great things. So if you're on Facebook Live, on our social channels, drop into the comments section, go follow those things. If you're on YouTube, we'll try to transfer over some of this information and we'll drop the list of books in the chat. Tonight, if you have time around 7, please tune into the TPR worth repeating so we can hear more about Lenora's story and what how she's kind of overcome those difficulties and manifested it into a phenomenally impactful organization. We have a couple of housekeeping things in terms of what's coming up here at Geekdom this week. On Thursday, we're going to have a presentation / workshop from the Green Labs. We're putting the details together on that, so stay tuned. It'll be at 12:30 on our channels. And then on Saturday or Sunday, I'm trying to remember, but the Smart SA Datathon viewing for the final presentations is coming up this weekend. So please keep an eye out for that. We want you to tune in. These teams have been working incredibly hard. If you don't know what the Smart SA Datathon is, it is an open data competition that the City of San Antonio and the Smart SA partners team up with CivTech SA, our civic innovation program here at Geekdom, and basically do it big with multiple open data sets from partners thrown into the community for several weeks. And then they come together with ideas and insights and present to the CIOs and our CEO, Charles Wooden. And then we kind of figure out how we can implement those insights and how we can learn and grow from each other. So thank you for all of that. I don't think that there's enough praise in the world to tell people about how much David Jones has impacted us, but I'm really glad we were able to give him his platform today. Please check out innocentijones.com if you would like to contact David or any of his team members on how to potentially benefit from his services or get connected into the organizations. It's not just Geekdom. He does work with Launch SA, the Impact Guild, Velocity TX and their programming, Alamo Angels, Active Capital. You're a phenomenal resource and a wonderful human, and we really appreciate you being here. And with that, everybody, we will tune in to you guys later on. Have a great Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Joyce.